In this lecture, I'm going to quickly show you how to install Python, which is an essential requirement for us to work with Django. So for this, first of all, we need to visit the website python.org and then simply click on Downloads. And then you can install the latest version of Python, which is Python 3.12.1 at the time of recording of this course. So I click on this button and now we're trying to download the Python, and then I'm going to run the setup file. So the first option that we can select is install now, and you can say use admin privileges when installing python.exe, which is okay, and also you can say add python.exe to the environment variables to the path, and then I simply click on install now. And then simply click on yes again, and within a couple of seconds we should be ready with the Python on our system. So as we can see, setup was successful, and then simply click on close. And now to verify the Python installation, you can simply go to the command prompt, and inside our command prompt I'm going to say python -- version, and that is going to give you the version that we have just installed, which is 3.12.1. So as we are just done with the main prerequisite for us to start working with Django, which is Python obviously, the next step for us is to install the Django. So we're going to work with the Django latest version 5.0. In this lecture, we'll talk about how do we set up the virtual environment before we start working with Django. Now, the most important point here, we have so far installed just Python but not Django yet. Now, the point here is, can I go ahead right away and install Django, or should I be creating a virtual environment first, and then inside that virtual environment, should I be installing the Django? The answer is, if I don't create the virtual environment right now, and if I straight away go ahead with the Django installation, we call that as a global installation. So that means you're installing a specific version of Django on your entire system. So that means whatever projects that you may develop on this system after the installation of Django, they all belongs to the same version of the Django that's been installed. So that means you cannot have different versions of Django for different projects. In real-time scenarios, people might be working with different projects and that were developed using the different versions of Django. So that means it's not really possible for somebody to work with different projects of different Django versions. Because if you install Django right now, it will be a global installation. So that means all the projects on this system should only be using that specific version. So that is why we have to install the virtual environment first, and inside that virtual environment, we should be installing the Django. So the point here is, what exactly is a virtual environment? Some people in the other technologies, they refer this as a workspace, or some people in the other technologies call it as a sandbox. So at the end of the day, a virtual environment is a workspace which allows you to isolate all the dependencies for your project and all the configurations of one project from the another. So that means we can have different projects using different versions of Django on this computer if I install Django inside a virtual environment. So that means we can create different projects with different versions of libraries on the same computer, and they won't interfere with each other. But if you strongly believe that you will be working with all the projects on your computer with a single version of Django, then it's a different scenario. So that means all your projects are using the same version of Django, so you don't have any issues. But still, it is recommended to create a virtual environment first and then install Django inside. Today, you might be working with this same version in all projects, but in future, so some projects may get upgraded to the next versions of Django, or some projects may stay at the same level. So we cannot predict. So that is why we must create a virtual environment first, and inside that we should be installing the Django. Now, how do we create a virtual environment? So fortunately, there is a module that's already been shipped for you when we install the Python 3.12. So you can see VNV is an inbuilt module that comes with the Python versions 3.3 and later. Because we have installed the 3.12 already, so that means we already have the VNV with us. And it is a simple and lightweight way to create the virtual environment. So I'll be showing you practically now how do we create the virtual environment. So for that, we will be running a command called as python -m means module, and the module name is VNV followed by the environment name. So imagine you are developing a project for a client called as X. So then the environment is X. You're developing another project for a different client and it is Y. So the environment is Y. So you will have two different environments and two different projects running side by side, probably with different versions of Django. So at the time of creating the environment name, it is always recommended to use the lowercase letters and avoid spaces in that environment name. Obviously, if you have two different words for the environment name, yes, you may as well separate it by a hyphen. So I'll show you now how to create the virtual environment and how do we activate that environment and how do we deactivate when the job is done. So I'll talk about the last 2 points pretty shortly after I show you how to create the virtual environment. So as you can see now, I'm at the command prompt and we want to create a virtual environment. Yes, currently I have C and D drives on this computer, so I'll be switching to the D drive because I'll be storing the entire training exercises for this course in a single project inside a single virtual environment. So I'm at the root directory of my D drive, so I'm going to say python -m VNV is the module name, and I'm going to call my environment name as Django Demos, and then I click on enter. So what happens now, this is going to create a new virtual environment for us with the name Django Demos. Now what happens now, I just created the virtual environment name, but fortunately when I see the directory, you can see it has created for me a new folder called as Django Demos. Okay, let's switch to that folder and let's have a quick look at the list of files and directories we have. Notice here we have an include directory and a lib directory and a scripts directory. Suppose if I take you to my include directory and if I see the list of files, it is empty currently. And if I go back to my lib folder and I look at the files, it has got something like say site packages. So let's go to the site packages and see the list of files. And currently we just have pip. So basically what happened when I install Python on my globally on my system, pip has already been installed. In fact, we have seen where pip application is sitting on our computer. So what happened when I created the virtual environment is whatever pip version you have globally on your system, that has been copied over as a separate copy to this virtual environment. So now if I go to the pip folder and if I see the files, and these are the files I do have, and then let's switch to the distribution stuff. So I will switch to the dist info folder and then I see the directory, and these are the different files that we have in this pip folder. So that is how we currently have an include directory and a lib folder. So in addition to these folders, if I can take you to the scripts folder, and then if I see the directory, yes, this is where the pip.exe is sitting for us. And you can see the python.exe is also available for me in the scripts folder. And now notice here there is an activate.bat file and there is a deactivate.batch file. So whatever Python that you have installed globally on your system and whatever pip you got globally on your system, the same files got copied over to the scripts folder. So whenever I use the pip command inside my upcoming virtual environment, yes, it will be using this Python and this pip module. Now, so far the virtual environment has been created because I can see very well that there is a Django demos folder got created with include lib and scripts folder. So now I need to run my batch file by just simply typing activate. The moment I type activate, notice just before your prompt, I can see my virtual environment name here called as Django demos. So that means whatever upcoming projects and whatever Django apps that you will be developing throughout this course, I will be storing them inside this virtual environment. So, and then I will be installing the Django inside this virtual environment in the next lecture. So in future, whatever dependencies, Python modules or libraries that you will be downloading, they all will be stored into this virtual environment. Tomorrow from the development server, if you have to move that to the production server, then it will be very easy if you use the virtual environments. It is possible, as I said, without creating virtual environment, you can directly install Django globally on this system. So imagine this window, I call it as a virtual environment, and this desktop, what you're seeing behind, is your global installation. So on a global installation area, you can only have one version of the software. But inside the virtual environment, I can have one version for different projects or different virtual environments. So at any point of time after the virtual environment has been activated, suppose you're done with your job, and you can simply run the command deactivate, and now you can see the prompt here without that virtual environment name. So tomorrow if I can go back to type activate again, so I'm currently inside my virtual environment. Yes, I'll show you now in the next lecture how do we install Django inside this virtual environment. So that is how we have executed the activate.bat file to activate the virtual environment, and we have also seen how to run the deactivate.batch file to deactivate the virtual environment. So overall, if we can quickly look at the different advantages of working inside the virtual environments, is the isolation of dependencies. So whenever we're doing a Django project, and we will be downloading different modules and of different versions, so that means these versions are specific to this project. If you have another project Y, then you better create a different virtual environment. So every project will have a different virtual environment, and probably they will be using the different versions of the Django or different versions of the modules that you required for that application. So isolation of dependencies is the main advantage of virtual environment, version compatibility, and of course the ease of deployment. So if you have a virtual environment with so many packages and so many versions of the modules, tomorrow if you have to switch that to the production server, I will show you pretty shortly in the further lectures how do we create a requirements.txt file, and how do we install on the production server based on the entries that we have in the requirements.txt file. I'll talk about that requirements.txt file pretty shortly. So that is how in this lecture we talked about the necessity of creating the virtual environment. How do we create a virtual environment? How do we activate and how do we deactivate? We've seen the Python application, and the pip application is available for you inside that virtual environment right now for us. We have a copy of Python and we do have a copy of pip on the global installation already outside of this virtual environment for us when we install Python for the very first time. So when we created the virtual environment, we got a copy of those two applications inside our virtual environment. In this lecture, we will now be installing Django inside our virtual environment. So you can visit this website DjangoProject.com and you can download the latest release 5.0, and of course you will find the complete documentation on this website. Now if I click on the download latest release, you can see the command pip install Django == 5.0. So I'm going to copy this command and then I go back to my command prompt, and notice here we're inside this virtual environment right now, which is really very important. Now if I say, if I say deactivate, now I'm outside the virtual environment. Now if I install Django, it will be installed globally on my system. Now when I say activate, let me switch to that folder by going to the scripts folder, and then when I say activate, now the virtual environment has been activated. And now if I copy paste that command pip install Django == 5.0, and then when I press enter, now we are installing Django inside that virtual environment. So obviously on this computer at this stage, I do not have Django globally on my system. I only have Django right now inside this virtual environment. So as Django has been installed successfully, you can always run this command python-m module Django _version, and then when I press enter, it will show me the version of the Django that you have installed. Okay, let me run that command by myself, python-m Django --version, and then when I press enter, you can see the version that I have currently installed of Django inside my virtual environment Django demos is 5.0. Now that is how we have installed Django inside our virtual environment. Now what if, for example, if I say deactivate now, and now I'm out of my virtual environment, and then I'm going to run my same command, which is python-m Django --version. Now it is showing me as 5.0. So you can notice here, even though I'm outside my virtual environment, it is still showing me the version as 5.0. Probably this command window hasn't realized I have just uninstalled it. So I have come out of my virtual environment. So let me go back to that command prompt one more time. And now if I try to say python-m Django --version, and then when I press enter, it is trying to tell me there's no module called as Django. Now if I go back to my virtual environment, so which is pretty much inside my Django demos, and then into my scripts folder, now if I say activate, we're now inside the Django demos. Now if I say python-m Django --version, and now it is trying to tell me you have the version 5.0. So that is how we have activated our virtual environment, and inside that virtual environment we have installed the Django. For any reason, if you want to uninstall Django, yes, you can simply say pip uninstall. You can type Django and then the version number as 5.0. Now I'm trying to uninstall Django from my virtual environment, so I will say yes, I proceed. Now it has successfully uninstalled Django. Now if I run my previous command to figure out which version of Django I have currently on this virtual environment, now it is trying to tell me there's no module name called as Django. So that means it has been successfully uninstalled. So let's go ahead and try to install that one more time. So I'm going to say pip install, and then the module is Django 5.0, and then I press enter. Now we are reinstalling Django inside our virtual environment. Now this is how for every different project you can create a different virtual environment, and then you can install a different version of Django. Currently I specified the Django version as 5.0. But imagine you have a project that requires Django 4.0, then you will install 4.0 inside that another virtual environment. So every virtual environment can have a different version of Django. So this is something like side-by-side applications running with different version numbers. In this lecture, we're going to install the editor that we will be using throughout this course, which is Visual Studio Code. So for that, you can simply search for Visual Studio Code download and then simply go to the code.visualstudio.com/download. So I'm going to click on download, and then I'm going to select my user installer for the Windows platform, and similarly you can try for the other operating systems as well. So I'll be teaching this entire course on the Windows operating system. So now you can see we're just getting ready with the VS Code download, and as soon as I'm ready, we're going to quickly install this. So I'm going to click on open file, and yes, we're going to click on accept the agreement, and then click on next again, and next again, and next again. Yes, we can go for a desktop icon, and you can also choose these two options to help us to open the files into the VS Code once we are ready with the code in Django. So I'm going to click on next again and simply click on install, and it's going to take a couple of seconds for us to get this done. And as once VS Code is ready for us, we will be installing some essential extensions in Visual Studio Code for Python and Django. Yes, now I can simply click on finish to verify the installation, and we have the VS Code in place. In this lecture, we'll talk about MVT design pattern, what Django Web Framework uses. So whenever we talk about any design patterns or architectural patterns, we have plenty of different patterns in the in different technologies. Like if we talk about .NET MVC, so it uses model view controller architecture. And if you see the other technologies where we have the model view model, so the Django uses completely a different when compared to those other two like MVC and MVVM. It uses MVT, where M stands for model and then views and templates. So I'm just going to give you a quick introduction to the MVT design pattern, but you'll understand it much better when I practically create a model, when I create a view, when I create a template to run a single page. So first we concentrate on the model. So the model in MVT is much like in MVC. Even in MVC we have models. Even in Django, which uses MVT, it has got models. And these models provides the interface for the data stored in the database. So at the end of the day, your models are nothing but plain OOPS classes. And those classes will be having the attributes, and we will be doing object relational mapping to the underlying tables in the database. And then you have views in MVT here. So views in Django serve as the bridge between the model data and templates. You can see views are sitting pretty much between the model and templates. If you're familiar with MVC concepts, which is model view controller, so it's the controller that sits between the models and views in that design pattern. But in MVT, for the Django Web Framework, the concept is slightly bit different. Here, technically, the views sits between the model and templates. So some people they don't even hesitate to call views in MVT as controllers. So though conceptually the views does the same thing, but it is incorrect to call view as a controller in Django. The reason is Django itself acts like a controller for us to do the entire process. I'll explain that with the diagram in the next slide. And what exactly the templates contains, the templates are responsible for the entire user interface. That means we will be creating the .html files or maybe .css files to display the data that will be given to you from the view. So views are nothing but again your your Python function-based views. We have two different types of views in Django, like function-based views and class-based views. So I'll be showing you both of them in this course. So the views are responsible to communicate with the model, and model in turn communicates with the database, and then it gets the data, and that data it gives it to the views again, and views forwards that data to the templates. Templates receives the data and displays them in a nice looking way. So obviously I'll be using Bootstrap for displaying this stuff in a nice looking way inside the templates. And as far as the database is concerned in this course, I'll be using the SQL Server. So you may use Oracle or you may use MySQL. So let me explain the same concept with the help of a diagram. So notice here, you are an end user who is making a request. When you make a request to a website that was developed in Django, obviously your request is initially received by the Django framework itself. And then it will understand what kind of request you're trying to make or where would you like to go. So it will pass that request to a very special file called as urls.py. So I'll show you all these files in the subsequent lectures. Currently, I'm just trying to explain how exactly the Django applications works. So as soon as the request is received by the user, to the Django will forward that request to the urls.py file, and there it will compare where exactly you would like to go. For example, you're trying to say amazon.com/orders. So orders is where you would like to go. Now in the urls.py, I'll clearly mention if the URL route path contains orders, then redirect the user to a specific view. And your view is nothing but a .py file again. Now view has to speak to the model, and model will in turn speak to the database, and it gets me the orders, and those orders will come back to the view, and view passes those records to the HTML, and then the HTML we will be writing the code to display the data properly. So this is how we have a model, we have a view, and we have a template. Now whenever you're following a design pattern, what is the main reason why somebody has to follow design patterns, why companies insist on design patterns for the developers? So there were many technologies where we did not have design patterns, and we were able to develop the websites very perfectly. The reason for design patterns is two things. One is separation of concerns. So that means as a developer, I'm dividing my code, I'm separating my code, some code into models, some code into views, some code into templates. So I'm developing three different independent units, and then they are integrated together at the time of execution of that page. So separation of concerns is the key thing. And the next thing is conventions over configurations. So what do I mean by conventions over configurations? Means, so there is a convention that you must put all your HTML pages in a folder called as templates, and your models file name has to be model.py. Your views file name has to be views.py, and your routing, where you specify the route paths, has to be urls.py. So there are some conventions that we need to follow. So when a design pattern like MBT insists the developers that you should do, otherwise I won't work. So that means all the developers will listen to that design pattern. So that way, all the developers in the team follows the same rules, and they will have some kind of uniformity in their approach. So that is the main reason why somebody opts for the design pattern, especially as a company or as a client. So the key things for adhering to the design pattern is separation of concerns, and then again the conventions over configurations. In the subsequent lectures, I will be creating a Django project. I'll be creating an application inside that project, and that project will have the urls.py, the views.py, models.py, and of course the HTML pages in the templates folder. In this lecture, I'll give you a quick overview of the PIP, which is the package installer for Python. Now, why do we require PIP? Because if we have to download any libraries or if you have to download any Python modules, and then you need to install and then you need to manage, you need a package manager. So fortunately, this PIP manager, package manager is included for you by default if you have installed Python version 3.4 or later. So far we have installed 3.12, so that means we have PIP. In fact, I have shown you where pip.exe is existing on my main system as well as inside the virtual environments scripts folder. Now the PIP, which is purely a package manager for Python, in the other technologies like in .NET, we have the NuGet package manager. So just like how we have NuGet package manager for .NET, for JavaScript frameworks, like we have the Node package manager. And of course, for the Ruby on Rails, we have the Gem package managers. So similarly, like NPM, NuGet, or Gem, we have the PIP for Python. So we will be installing, in fact, Django in the next lecture with the help of the PIP package manager. Now, we can also verify the version of the PIP that's been installed for you by just running the command pip -version at the command prompt. So you can notice now I'm at the command prompt, and then I'm going to run simply the command pip -version, and that is going to show me the PIP version that I have on the system is 23.2.1, and of course the Python I have is 3.12. Of course, if you see the directory, which is where the pip.exe is sitting in, it's not necessary that we should run this command from the scripts folder because I'm currently inside this virtual environment. And now if I say pip -version, yes, the same command runs because that path has already been added to our environment variables. So that is how we have created the virtual environment. We have installed Python on the main system globally. Now we are supposed to install Django inside this virtual environment with the help of the PIP. I'll show you that in the next lecture. In this lecture, we'll try to run another important command of pip, which is the pip list, and also another command called as pip freeze. Now, there is a slight difference between these two commands here. Now, notice so far we have created the virtual environment, we have activated it, and then we have installed Django inside that virtual environment. So that means we already have something inside that virtual environment. So if I really want to know what are the packages that were installed inside my virtual environment, then I can use the command pip list. It's not necessary that this command works only if you have the virtual environment. If you do not have the virtual environment and if you have installed everything globally on your system, even then it will show you the list of installed packages. So first, let me show you the list command, and then I'll show you the difference between list and freeze. So you can see now I'm at my command prompt inside the virtual environment, and now if I type the command pip followed by the option like list, it is trying to tell you these are the 5 different packages that are currently installed inside this virtual environment. Out of that, the most important thing for me is Django, which is 5.0. Of course, we have the pip 23.2.1. So that is how pip list command will show you the list of dependencies or the list of packages that are part of this virtual environment. So in future, whatever projects that you will be creating, so that project will be having a dependency on these modules. Now the same command, if I type here pip freeze, and then when I press enter, I can see there are 4 different results. Unlike here, we have 5 different results. So the major difference is pip freeze doesn't show the entry for pip itself. So that means whatever the packages or whatever that were installed with the help of the pip, it is only trying to display for me here, whereas pip list will show me including PIP. Now the point here is if pip list and pip freeze are showing me the same results, what is the major difference between these two? When do we use which one? So pip list, ideally it is meant if you really want to see the list of installed packages, you will simply use the pip list command. But if you type pip freeze, it will give you the list of installed packages in a requirements format. So imagine currently I'm on a development system and you're done with the project. Now you want to move that to the production server or a staging server. So obviously you need to have the same dependencies or the same modules on the destination system as well. So with the help of the pip freeze, you can create a very special file called as the requirements.txt. Now I'm going to show you how do I create my requirements.txt on the development server, and then how do I install these dependencies again on the production server. I'll try to simulate that behavior. So if you want to create that requirements.txt file, you will simply type the command pip freeze greater than, like you're trying to redirect the output of this command to a file called as requirements.txt. So let's go to the command prompt, and then I'm going to type pip freeze greater than, and then I'm going to say requirements.txt. Now, if you notice the directory, we have a new file called as requirements.txt. Of course, at my command prompt, if I just type requirements.txt, it is showing me the same output that I have here. So that means whatever output that we had here, everything has been put into a special file called as requirements.txt. Now this txt file is clearly saying you need this module of this version, you need this module of this version. So at the end of the day, the requirements.txt file just contains the list of modules and their corresponding versions that are essential for the projects running inside this virtual environment. So as a developer on this development system, I created my requirements.txt file. Okay, so let's say, for example, I'm going to uninstall my Django right now, and then I will assume that I'm on a production server, and obviously that doesn't have Django, and now we have to install these dependencies from this requirements.txt file. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to uninstall my Django version 5.0, and I press enter. So now you can see we have successfully uninstalled Django from this virtual environment. So just for the understanding purpose, I created the requirements.txt file on my development server. Now, at this point of time, I am on a production server. The production server also has got a virtual environment, let's say. So now the point here is how do I copy whatever I have on my development server to my production server? Fortunately, we have this requirements.txt file. So from that requirements.txt file, I can install all my modules, whatever are pretty much sitting inside my txt file here. So obviously at this point of time, if I say pip list, you can see except Django, I have the rest of the modules inside this virtual environment, because these are the default modules that you already have when the virtual environment got created. So currently my virtual environment doesn't have Django because I'm on a production server for our understanding purpose. But because I have my requirements.txt file, I'm going to run a command pip install -r, and what's your file is requirements.txt. So this file was created by the developer on the developer virtual environment. Now I'm running this command, imagine, on a production server. Now when I press enter, whatever we have in that requirements.txt, everything is getting installed inside this virtual environment of the production server. Now if I say pip list and I'm see Django version 5.0 is pretty much available. So that is how we have two different commands. One is pip list, the other one is the pip freeze. Pip list means it will show you the installed packages. Pip freeze is used in the scenarios when you want to get the list of installed packages but you want to move them to a requirements.txt, and in future you can install all the dependencies from the requirements.txt with the help of the pip install -r followed by the requirements.txt file. So that is how we could copy the developer environment dependencies to the production server as well. In this lecture, we will now start working with Django by creating a brand new project. And then we'll also be creating the apps or applications inside the project. So for that purpose, notice I'm inside my Django demos folder. And in the previous sections, we've seen how to create the virtual environment and how to activate it. So first of all, let me go to my scripts folder and then activate the virtual environment. And then I will simply come back to my root folder. Now we will see how to create a brand new Django project. So I'm going to run a command called as Django admin, and then I would say start project and then the project name. Okay, let's say I'm going to call this as Django basics project. So in Django, we have a project and we have applications. We have two different terms here. One project can contain many applications. Technically, one project is one web application and one app is one website. So that way, one Django project can have multiple applications or multiple websites. So now, after the project has been created, now if I see the directory, you can see there is a project called as Django Basics project. Now, simply switch to that folder, or else I'm going to switch to that folder, and then I'm going to say code dot to open this folder inside my Visual Studio Code. So as soon as the project is created, and this is where we have opened our project inside the Visual Studio Code. Now you can see the Django Basics project, and this is our projects folder, and it has got different Python files, and out of my root folder we have the manage.py file. Now I will be explaining in detail about each and every file that we already have when the project got created. So right now I don't want to spend too much time in explaining all these files, because we want to get going by creating our simple web page. But I'll be talking about these files pretty shortly. But the most important files that we see here is the settings.python file and then the urls.python file. These two files I'll be using pretty shortly in this section. So now the project is ready for us. So we want to verify the installation of Django, because we have installed Python, we created a virtual environment, and inside that we installed Django, and then we created a brand new project inside the virtual environment. So by default now you have a project that can be executed in the browser. So after the project is created, how do we test it? Okay, let's go back to the command prompt one more time, and here I'm going to run a command py for Python manage.py. Technically we are trying to run this module manage.py, and then I'm going to run a command called as run server. So Django has got a built-in development server with which we are able to run our server-side code, and then I press enter. So by default, what happens, the development server that we have with Django as a built-in web server, it tries to host your project on a port number called as 8000, and of course this can be modified to a different port number of your choice. If we have any errors, those errors will be listed out here. Currently we created a brand new project and we really don't know at this stage what are these files, what is the code that we have in these files. We're not interested still about that stuff. We're just interested right now is how do we create a project and how do we run it so far. So I can hold my control key and then I can click on this URL, and you can see now this is the home page that you normally see if everything is installed perfectly. So it is trying to tell you the installation has worked successfully. Congratulations. And we have the Django 5.0, and you can see some Django documentation links here, Django community, and of course a sample app as part of the tutorials. So this is the home page that you normally see when you try to run your Django projects. So by default, this is running on the port number 8000 with the localhost 127.0.0.1, which is the default IP address for localhost when you are offline. Of course, if you see this home page, that means your installation is successful. So that is what at this point of time I'm planning to verify it. Okay, let's go back to the command prompt and then press Ctrl C to exit that execution of the program. Okay, let me use the arrow keys on my keyboard. Let's say you want to run this time this application on a port number 9000. And when I press enter, and now if I try to click this URL, so notice now your application is running on a port number 9000. Obviously, you give such a port number which is free or which is available on your system. So currently we are running our project on the port number 9000, and I press Ctrl C to end the execution. So that is how so far we have just created a brand new project and we've seen how to execute this. So the command that we use to create a brand new project is Django admin start project followed by the project name. And this project we have created inside the virtual environment. In the coming lectures, we will see how do we create applications inside this project and how do we create our own web pages. In this lecture, we will now see how do we create a brand new Django application and then add that to this project. So notice we are inside the folder, the Django Basics project, and this is where I have my manage.py file, and I should be in this folder to create my first app. So I'm going to run a command, Django admin start app, and then what's your app name? Okay, let's call this as Django Basics app, and then I press enter. So now this app we are creating inside this project. So after this command is executed, if I go back to my VS Code, you can see now we have two different folders. One was the project that we created in the previous lecture, and this is the one that just got created. Again, when a brand new application has been created, we have plenty of built-in files like init.py, admin, apps, models, tests, and views. Of course, in the project folder, we have init, ASGI, WSGI, settings, URLs, and here we have the apps.py. So we have plenty of modules. By default, we have it when the projects or the applications are created. So I will try to explain the significance of the various files that we already have in the app and also the significance of various files in the project folder one by one in the upcoming lectures. At this point of time, I'm just trying to give you an overview or the outline of creating a project, adding an application to the project, and how do we create our own web pages. So first of all, when I'm inside my application, the first file that I would like to work with is the views.py. In the very first section, I did explain to you the significance of the design pattern that Django uses, which is the MVT, model views, and templates. So let me install this extension. So this extension, when we install, you get the intelligence as you type the code. So that means you won't be making any errors when you are typing these statements related to the Django or Python. Okay, now anyway, this extension has been installed now. I will close this window. So now we are back into the views.py. So in the design pattern, we've seen MVT, model views, and templates. Of course, we have the models.py in the applications folder. We have the views.py in the application folder. What we still don't have is the templates. Yes, we will be creating the templates pretty shortly in the next example. So initially, I will try to work with the views.py by creating my very first view. So by default, when we enter into the views.py view, we have one statement so far from Django.shortcuts module. We are trying to import the render function because anything that you wish to render onto the view onto the browser is done with the function called as render. Now I'm going to create my very first view. So in Django we have two different types of views. One is the function based views which are predominantly used in the real time, and of course we have the class based views. So I'll be focusing more on the function based views initially, and then I'll try to show you at some stage in the course about the class based views and the difference between the function based and the class based views. Now I'm going to create my very first function based view. So, in Django, in Python, we create functions with the keyword def. Okay, what's the view name you would like to have is the home and then colon. Now, every view that you create, of course, this is what we call it as a function-based view. And I'm just using # to comment this line. So I'm saying def home, and every function-based view receives a special object called as a request, and then it returns response. So the view is responsible for receiving a request and then return some response back to the user. Okay, let's say for example, in my very first view, which is the home or the default view or the index view I should say, I'm going to return some response. So I'm going to say return HTTP response, and then I just want to return some basic hello world message. So I'm going to say hello world from Django 5. So obviously, because we have installed the Python extension, so now it is trying to tell you HTTP response, there is a small error, it is not defined. So VS Code helps you a lot. So you can simply click on quick fix, and then you can say add from Django.http import HTTP response. So that quick fix has added this line for us. So this is how we are done with our very first view called as the home, which is the function based view. And this view is receiving a request, and then it is trying to return some response back to the client. So now, because we have created this view inside our app, so currently there is no link between the app and the project so far, except that the app was created inside the project. So how do we link our application to the project? So inside our projects folder, you can see there is a very special file called as settings.py. So I'll be explaining, or we will be working with this settings.py file throughout this course for various things. Maybe when you wanted to specify your database connection string, or when we want to specify your CSS files path or the template files path, we will be working in the settings.py, which is where we maintain our configurational settings. So inside the settings.py, when you come down, you can see there is something like installed apps. So by default, when the empty project was created, there are plenty of apps that were already been added to our project as dependencies that's getting listed under the installed apps. So we will see what are these sessions or static files, admin, auth, content types, these things. So currently, you simply go to the very last line and then type your app name. So what's my app name is Django Basics App. So this app name, you're basically typing it here inside the single quotes. So that is how our application is now available to our project under the installed apps category, and that setting we did in the settings.py. That's the first step. Now let's go back to the views.py, and our function based view at this point of time is ready. So our view is receiving a request object. Obviously this object name can be anything of your choice, but normally we prefer it to give it as request, because technically that is what is coming to this view from the Django's router engine. So the next step is to make a route entry inside a very special file urls.py, and that should be given to the urls.py file in the project urls.py file. So we have one more step before we could execute this app, that is the URLs configuration. I'll show you that in the next lecture. In this lecture, I'll not try to explain to you how to configure URLs for your views that belongs to your application. So first of all, we have two different folders. Don't get confused here. So first of all, let me expand my application folder. And inside this application folder, among all these Python files, I'm going to create a new file. Let's call this as urls.py. So please be noted, when we created the project, we already have a file called as urls.py in the projects folder. But I'm not concerned about that file at this stage. So whenever you are ready with your views and you want to test your views, you need to tell the Django routing engine that when somebody requests a specific with a specific path, okay, that should take me to this so-and-so home view. So that configuration has to be done in this urls.py file that I have created in the Django Basics app. So first of all, I'm going to import few essential modules here from the Django URLs. I'm going to import my path. So you can see URLs is a module and path is a function. Now the next thing, I'm going to create a special variable called as URL patterns, and it can be an array of strings. So normally when you create a website, means when you create an application, you will be navigating to different areas in your website. So we need to specify that path as a string of variables of an array inside this special variable called as URL patterns. So I'm going to define my very first path. Okay, what's the path you would like to use? The path name, let's say as home. And you also want to give some name to your routing path. Okay, let's call this as home again. So please be noted, in the views.py, my view name is home. But this name, what I'm trying to give here, can be a bit different. This name can also be a bit different. But just to avoid the confusion, I'm giving the same name. So that means when somebody tries to run my view in the browser, they will say localhost colon 8000 or 9000 / they will be typing here home. So how do we verify if somebody types home that I should be taken to this specific view? So that means I need to specify my view name. So we have to import our views from the current app. So notice this urls.py is existing inside the app folder. So I'm going to say from dot means my current folder, import views, which is this one. So inside this views we have the home. So now the second parameter for the path is views dot. Okay, what is the view name we have is the home. That's it. So at this point of time, you have successfully added your view into the urls.py file of your application. So these are called as application level routing or application level route specification, route path specification. So we have this special function path from the URLs module, which expects the path name. This path name can be anything of your choice. Whatever you type, you will be typing it in the browser. And if user types /home, that means if they type /home, I'm telling my Django framework, please take me to views.home. So this name is just a name that you're giving to your route path for the identification. Even if you don't specify the third parameter, it's not an error. So at this point of time, I'm done with my URLs configuration in the application. But there is one more thing that we need to do. So this application URL pattern has to be included in the project's urls.py file. So when I go to my project's urls.py file, so you can see we have some pre-written boilerplate code here. I'll try to explain to you in the coming lectures. But by default, yes, they're trying to import the admin module from the Django contrib, and also they're trying to import the path functions from the URLs. And by default, when the project got created, there is an admin path. And if I type admin, it takes me to admin.site.urls. So what is this admin site? We'll talk about a bit later. Now the next thing is this urls.py file. I need to link it with this urls.py file. So currently you are looking at the projects urls.py file. The applications urls.py file is here. Okay, the next step, after this path line, I'm going to link my app's URL here. So for that, I'm saying path. Okay, what's your application name? Is Django Basics app. So it can be any name. The path name, I'm going to give it as Django Basics app / and if anybody types this name in the URL address bar, then I'm going to say please include the file that I have just created, which is the Django Basics app.urls. And of course I'm having an error here because it is not able to figure out where include is coming from. So I'm going to do a quick fix. So both include function and then the path function are coming from the URLs modules. So what we are trying to specify with this line, if somebody types in the browser Django Basics app, so that means I'm going to tell my routing engine or the Django framework, okay, please go to this URLs for that purpose. So when I type Django Basics app, it takes me to this urls.py of this folder. So this is your app name dot your file name, the URLs include, and whereas this route path name, what I'm typing here, for the time being, I gave this route path name exactly similar to my app name, but it's not essential. You may type XYZ. But preferably, you keep some meaningful name so that when somebody visits the views of this app, they know that they are accessing the views of so-and-so app here. So at this point of time, we are done with the URLs configuration. So first we created the urls.py in the applications folder. Second, we went to the projects urls.py, and then we said if somebody types this route path, please use the URLs in this file. So then it goes to this file, and when somebody types home, then I take the user to the home view. So overall, the URL has to be the Django Basics app / home. When somebody types Django Basics app / home, then you will be taken to the views.home. Perfect. So we're good. So it's time to run our application now. I will just ensure that all my files are saved properly. Then I go back to my browser, the command prompt, and then we're going to say py manage.py, and then we say run server. And then I can open this URL, and then I can go back to my browser. So now you can see last time at least I got this default home page which verifies that the installation was successful, but this time I'm actually getting an error. The reason is we did not specify any default home page, default view. So you know that this view has got a home view, and you go to the home view if you type home. So does that mean that if I come here and if I type /home, you see it's not working perfectly because this home should be inside this route path, which is the Django Basics app. So now I'm going to say clearly here Django Basics app / home, and then I press enter. So now I can see the message hello world from Django 5. So when somebody looks at this URL, so you can see very well here the port number 8000 / the Django Basics app, that's my app name. Inside this app we have a view called as home. So you're accessing the view of a specific app. So that is why in the projects urls.py you specify some app path name that includes the URLs defined in the app level, application level. And then in the application levels urls.py, so when somebody types home, then you take them to home. Okay, for example, for your understanding, okay, I change this to house, for example, in the path. So now if I try to refresh, you get an error because it is trying to tell me there is nothing like home. This is the name that you need to type here. So this time I'm going to make this to house and I press enter. Everything is good. Then I will try to make this back to home. We have an error and then I type home. Everything is fine. So this is how we have successfully created our very first project and very first app and a very first view. And of course, first time we configured our views inside the urls.py at application level as well as the project level. In the subsequent lectures, we will see how do we improvise this application. So in the previous example, we have created a view called as home, and then this view is hardly returning a single line of message as the response. Okay, let's create another function-based view. For example, I'm going to say def. Let's say call this as show more messages is my view name, which receives a request object. So what's my plan this time? I want to return multiple messages. Okay, can I copy this line, for example? Can I paste it here? And I wanted to have like h2 and then h3, h4, h5, h6. We have 6 different messages. So I'm going to change this to h2 and this one to h3, h3 again, and h4. So we would like to have 6 different messages here. So that is h5, and finally we have h6. So notice here, at this point of time, I'm displaying some HTML inside the view itself. I'm using some HTML tag inside the views.py, which is not correct in real time because we're still in the initial stages of learning Django. I'm just trying to use the HTML tags in the views.py. Technically, we are supposed to use the HTML tags in a templates file, which I'll be showing you in the next example. So unlike my previous view, this view is trying to return for me multiple lines of messages. Of course, everything was passed as a single string, but we have different HTML tags here. Now, how do I test this view? So can I simply go to the browser now and can I type this view name? No, that is not what we did last time. So the URLs have to be configured. So first you need to configure the URLs at the application level. Okay, simply copy this line, paste it, and I'm going to say show messages is my path name. And then when I say views dot, we should be able to see our next view, which is the show more messages. And what's the name you want to give? Okay, show messages, for example. That's fine. The name can be anything of your choice. So now in the application labels urls.py, you are trying to take the user to the view called as show more messages. Okay, let me correct that to show more messages here. And then the urls.py, it is show more messages. And the path name is show messages. So we're done with the urls.py in the app. Now let's go to the urls.py in the project. Now here, I don't need to do anything. This is a one-time job in the project's urls.py. Every time when you create new views or modify any views, you need to touch only the urls.py of your application. Once the urls.py of the app has been included in the project's urls.py, you don't have to touch this for this app's URLs anymore. As long as I'm done with this entry here, we're good. So everything is nice. So we're going to put a comma here because we have multiple paths here. So this comma is important. So at this point of time, I'm done with the URLs configuration. I'm also done with a new view. So you see the the server is still running behind the scenes. I can go back to my browser and I'm going to test this. Okay, what is this name? Show messages. So inside my Django basics app / show messages, and then when I press enter, you can see it has taken me to this view. Every view at the end of the day is a simple function which is receiving a request and returning a response. And the response that I got here is this h1 to h6. So this is how we have just created another view, and we configured our view in the urls.py, and we are now able to execute it. Now, what if, for example, when I don't specify anything here, when I press enter, I'm getting an error. Okay, then you say, okay, you do not have a home page, but we do have the app called as Django Basics app. So when I just type my app name and then when I press enter, I'm still getting an error. The reason is you have two valid strings. Either you should type here home or you should type here show messages. Only then it will work. If you don't type anything, you're getting an error. So normally every website will have a default home page. So what you can do now, in case you want to see your home view as the default view, just copy this line and try to paste it here. So I'm going to say, if user doesn't type anything, space is empty in the path, then take me to the home view again. So this time, interestingly, after I save this file, when I refresh my page, you can see my home view is coming to me by default. If you type by yourself home, even then you go there. If you don't type home, even then you are in the home view. Okay, by default, you want to be in the show messages view as a default view. Okay, copy this show more messages, put this here and give some nice name here. Perfect. So that means if I now refresh my page and without typing where I would like to go, the default route path is the show more messages. Yes, normally it's the home view or the index view will be the default. Now I switched it back to the home. When I refresh, I'm back to my home view. So that is how you can have a default view for your application. In this lecture, we'll try to create one more view that basically returns value of variables as response. Unlike in my previous two sample views, we were returning some static text. Maybe here we have a very lengthy static text. So instead of that, we want to return some value of a variable as a response. So every time you want to achieve something in your website, you create a view. Okay, I'm going to say dev. Okay, I'm going to say use variables as response. Yes, every function-based view will have a request as the parameter, input parameter. So the plan here is I'm having a variable called as message, and this is going to have h1, and then I close my h1 tag. Okay, give some initial value, something like say welcome to Django development. Okay, then I'm going to say message plus equals to, we want to have one more message as h2, and I'm going to have one for 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we are concatenating a string here. So we're trying to take a variable and whose value you would like to return as response. Okay, this I have as 4, 5, 6. Perfect. So here we were having a pretty lengthy string. We're just trying to do some concatenation here. And finally, I will say return HTTP response. What is it you want to return this time is the message itself. Perfect. So how do I test this view? The concept is pretty simple. Go to the urls.py file of your application and add a URL pattern here. Okay, let's copy paste this one. Okay, so I'm going to say use variables as response. And then when I type here views dot And then when I type use, I can see, let me type capital. So we're going to type views.use variables as response. Perfect. And I'm going to give some name, something like say use variables as response. Perfect. So the view is ready, and an entry for that view is being done in the inside the urls.py file. Perfect. We good. So let's go back to the browser, and what's the route path name we are trying to give is use variables. I copy my path there, then I paste it here, I press enter. So we will be verifying. We have some syntax error. Let's go back and verify. So always when you try to run your application in the browser, okay, let's see for any common errors here. So we have a small problem. Let me put that comma here because we added an extra route path to the URL patterns. I save it and I refresh it. Now you can see the message is this one. Welcome to Django development. We are seeing this message for 6 times. So that is how I'm slightly trying to improvise the complexity of the example step by step so that you get used to that. Initially, we were returning static message. Then we are now trying to return value of a variable. Now you might say, okay, you have a variable, but here you're hard coding your message here. Yes, that can be avoided in the next example where the value for the variable can be supplied by the user. So that example I'm going to show you in the next lecture. In this lecture, we will try to create another function-based view where we will be using the variables again, but the values for the variables of your view have to be supplied by the user. Okay. Let me create a new view here. So I'm going to create a new view. Let's call this as get request demo, get request variables, and it is having a request object. And what's the plan here? In the view, when I'm trying to call my specific view, we would like to supply some query string. Okay, so here I would like to say message equals to Django 5.0. So I want to pass this value Django 5.0 to this variable of this view. So that is the whole plan here. So inside my view, my get request variables view, whatever values that you supply as part of the query string in the address bars, that will come to the request. So you know that there are 2 types of requests. One is the get requests and post requests. Of course, we have plenty of other requests like put, delete, and patch. So we'll talk about the other types of requests when we talk about the REST APIs. But for the time being, when you are inside a browser and then when you're trying to type some URL and when you press enter, that is called as a get request. So whenever you're passing any query string along with the address along with the URL, that query string values will come to the request object. So I need to verify here what kind of request has the user made. Has he made a get request or a post, put, delete, patch, like that? Currently it's only a get request. So how do I verify the request type? So I can say if request dot method. So I'm going to say if request dot method equals to, I would try to compare it with the get request. Okay, this is lowercase. If request dot method equals to get, that means you are typing some URL in the address bar, and then when you press enter, the default type of request that browsers understands are only get requests. So if the request is get, I want to verify if you have supplied any value for the special attribute query string parameter called as message, for example. So I would say if request dot get of get, okay, what's the parameter name you're considering as message? If there is a value for the message parameter, then I would like to take that value into a variable. Okay, something like say sorry, the value has already been supplied from the message. So I will simply assign request.get of message to the message variable. Otherwise, I will say else message equals to you haven't supplied any value for message. You haven't supplied value for message query string or message parameter. So this is how, unlike last time, I was actually getting the values. I was giving the values like welcome to Django development by myself in the program. We were hard coding it. But this time, just for the demonstration purpose, whatever value that you would like to print as part of this view, you're supposed to pass that string as part of the URL. So if the request.method is get, and if you have supplied some value for the message parameter, then I take that value, else I give some default value. And finally, when we have to return, I would say return HTTP response. What you want to return is the message itself. So when you execute this view, you don't supply any value for message, you will see this value. If you supply some value, then you will see whatever value you have supplied. Perfect. Now this name, what I'm trying to give here as message, can be anything of your choice. So before I test it, I will go back to my urls.py. Then I will add one more string to my URL pattern. So let's call this as get request demo is going to be my route path name. And then I would say views dot get request variables, and the name can be get request variables. Perfect. Very good. So this time the path name has to be get request demo. I save this file and everything is good. So ensure that we do not have any errors. That's perfect. Let's go back to browser. And what's the name I'm supposed to try? Get request demo. Now I press enter. So now it is trying to tell me the method is get, and you haven't supplied any value for message. So this value, you haven't supplied any value, is coming here. Okay, what if I come here, then I type question mark message. Okay, then I say Django 5.0, and then I press enter. So now you can see this value, what you are trying to supply it in the URL bar, message equals to Django 5.0, has been displayed here. So that means request.get of message. So this name, what you're supplying here, should be equivalent to the name that you supply here. So you can pass any number of parameters. So let's say, for example, I wanted to have one more parameter. Let's copy this and paste it. Let's say I wanted to have one more parameter, something like, say, country. So if you supply a value for country, then I'll display that. Otherwise, I will say you haven't supplied any value for the country parameter. So of course, you're trying to assign the same value to the message. So here I would say message plus equals to, and here also message plus equals to. So initially you may have message value as empty spaces. So if you don't supply any value for the message, or if you don't supply any value for the country, you will see these two messages. Perfect. Everything is good. Let's go back to the browser. And let's say I'm not supplying anything first time. So when I press enter, it is trying to tell me you haven't supplied any value for message as well as the country parameter. Okay, can I say message equals to 5.0? Perfect, but you haven't supplied any value for the country parameter. So I would say ampersand means for the second parameter. Okay, what's the country value is India. And I can see two different messages are getting displayed here. One for the message parameter, the other one is for the country parameter. Of course, I'm not using really H1 when I'm trying to assign the values, but when I'm showing the else messages, I'm using the h1. So that is how, in this example, we've seen how to handle the GET requests. We're not really interested at this point of time what is post, put, delete, and patch. We will be doing that when we do the REST API using Flask also. But I just listed out these different types of requests for your knowledge purpose at this stage. At this point of time, the only request that the browser supports is the HTTP GET request for us.